morning. I have so many questions from people on like buying a first house, how you save up to get a deposit, all of that type of stuff. I feel like I could do some sort of content on like how to save money, but I feel like that would be such a like disservice to how hard things actually are at the moment, and also be really disingenuous to like how I actually got my deposit and how I got on the property ladder to then end up in the house that we're in now. I wanted to just be completely honest in this video and share like exactly where the money came from. I genuinely think it's so important to share this stuff, to stop giving other people looking for a house or wanting to get on the property ladder a really skewed perception. Hopefully this like really honest picture is actually much more tangible and helpful as well, and puts a bit of an honest perspective on buying a house out there, because I just feel like no one's been honest on here. I'm gonna go sit down with my cuppa and just chat to you, break it all down, say exactly where this money has come from, and I really hope this is super beneficial to anyone else looking to buy a first house. Let's do this like full breakdown. So I bought my first house in 2020. I was, I think, just turning 23 at the time, which is super young to have a first property. Not to do flashbacks to the pandemic, but if you think back then, that was at the point where it was very early in the pandemic when I bought that house. It was an incredibly scary time to buy. There was so much news around like the housing market was going to crash, everything was going to drop. So that was kind of like the context of when I first bought a house. Now if I was to go into like the figures a little bit more and stuff, my deposit at the time, the Help to Buy ISA existed, and so I had a Help to Buy ISA and I'd had it for ages, and I basically ended up saving around £10,000 into that Help to Buy ISA. Now I know you might be thinking like that's a lot of money, clearly you were good at saving and you did do the bulk of that yourself, but I can't stress enough how different the cost of just life was back then. I'd saved that up over a lot of time from being able to live really cheaply. Like my rent was £300 a month. Now rent is not that cheap, so the basics of what you pay is more expensive. Food shops are more expensive. Travel itself is more expensive. Like I used to be able to get flights for like £30–50. It's not like that anymore. I feel like even though yes, I saved £10,000, I saved that at a time where it was much easier to save £10,000. The kickstart point for me in buying at that point in time, just after I'd graduated and into basically a pandemic, was sadly due to the fact that my granddad had passed away during the pandemic. I'll not go into like the emotional side of it and stuff, but if anyone else lost a family member in the pandemic, you will know how absolutely brutal of a time it was. And my granddad had passed away, I was given £5,000 inheritance. So I now had a different opportunity on my plate, unbelievably sad circumstances, and I would much rather have not had that be the case, of course, that goes without saying. Also had £5,000, which then provided opportunity as well. And I think a lot of people have money either gifted from parents or they get inheritance and stuff, and that creates their ability to purchase a property. And I don't think many people are that open around how often that happens, or the fact that that happened for them. If I didn't have that inheritance, I would not have been able to buy a house. But this leads us nicely into the price of that first property. So the price of my first house was £97,500, which again, I think it is so important to say that that does not exist anymore. I could not have afforded anything over that price because I needed to have the cheapest mortgage possible in order to be allowed a mortgage while freelancing in a pandemic. What was a cheap property only 4 years ago, only in 2020, in my lifetime of buying a house, which is not long, has changed so much. I don't think you could buy a property that's livable at all under 100,000, even getting towards that £150,000 mark. My first mortgage was £82,500, and the monthly repayments on that was something like £300. And then the next thing that helped me get to the point of growing that amount of money that I could put into a future house to get to the house that I'm at now was that the market shot up. I'd been in there for 1 year and it went from 97,500 to 120,000, which now meant that in cash equity in that property, I had £37,500. In 1 year would have never happened for me. There is no way I would have saved up or managed to invest and have that come back in investments to me ever in a year. Like, that is crazy. So that has had a huge impact in my ability to then progress and go into a different property from there. We actually ended up selling at the height of the market after about a year of being in that house, which means we also bought at the height of the market. Now, I would be so open to chatting through this next step that I did, where I think I made a lot of financial wrong decisions, and I have quite a bit of regret around it. Basically bought a property that needed quite a lot of renovation work doing to it. We bought that property wrongly, or I now know it was a mistake, that we bought it at the height of its price. So it was currently the highest value in the street, which is not the recipe that you do when you buy a renovation project. That property we bought at 2010, using the equity from the house that it sold, and then being on a joint mortgage, so we could pool our incomes together to then have a higher mortgage. And now we ended up kind of cutting our losses and getting out of that property after a year, and it sold for 195. So we lost 15,000. So you can see that I gained 22,500 on the first one and technically lost 15,000 on the second property. Again, I'd be more than happy to chat into that if you're ever interested in stuff, but it was such a learning curve for me, and I would definitely take a completely different view to a house, property, renovation, all of that stuff. Haven't done that now. We technically had lost 15,000, but we ended up actually buying this house that we're currently in as part of a couple of new build schemes that we had available to us. And we were, again, lucky in that sense that we were able to get onto an emergency services scheme, because my fiance Reese had worked in emergency services at that time, and they had gifted us £15,000 as part of that scheme towards cash equity in this house. And I think there was quite a lot happening with new builds and stuff at the time to try and increase people to purchase, because as you can see, the market hit a peak and we bought at 210, and then the market had dropped and no one was buying, no one was moving houses, and the mortgage interest rates had also increased. And we were looking to actually get out of that renovation project at that time to improve our lifestyle, because I hated living in that renovation project. We had lost 15,000 in equity, but then we had gained it back. And one thing that I checked with the new build system and everything like that, the value of that 15,000, it didn't come off of the house price. It was literally gifted as cash equity. We basically broke even on that second property after a year. It might seem really complex, but essentially I made money on the first property, more money than I would have ever been able to make within a year. And then it kind of carried across to this house that we're now at. The price of the mortgage that we took out for this house was 263,000, and the deposit, so the cash equity that we have in this house, is 37,000, I believe. And then the costs for moving and stuff like that also came out of a little bit of that cash equity that I had, along with some other savings, and honestly kind of just getting by with any costs that would come up at the time as well. That is kind of how I managed to go from having £10,000 in savings to then having close to 35,000 in a property. I think from the outside someone might say, oh, you're 27 and you have a 4-bed house, and how have you managed to save the money to put into that? And it's been such a different story than I think people might see from the outside, as just oh, well, I just worked really hard and I saved really hard. There has been so many other factors in this, so much around the context of how I was able to buy my first property and even able to save that first £10,000. The context of having inheritance also helped me get that first property, and then genuinely luck of the market and being able to increase that by £22,000 within a year. I can't imagine being in the context that people are in at the moment of buying a first property. For me, if I was having to do this off of my own back and I needed £37,000, it would just not be realistic to try and be oh, I'll just save more, save better. It would feel so deflating. So I just think it's so important for anyone who is looking to buy their first house and stuff, and is thinking of how it can be possible, to just know that if you are seeing anyone like me with a house that, I'm not saying I have an amazing house by any means, it's very normal, I'm not even painted the walls or anything yet because I can't afford it, but just try not to kind of get yourself down, I suppose, because you just don't know the other factors that other people have had. And I post every week over on here on all things money. I do not hide anything when it comes to my personal finances. I really want to talk around this stuff more and give you a realistic perception. So yeah, please do subscribe if you'd like to see more, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.